Well, and it's Nestor, I mean, we tend to because they've been cut off, right? Or the West had been cut off. We forget about all these different Eastern Christianity, Eastern churches. That there's a thriving Christian population in India.
Yeah.
That Ethiopia was this massive Christian empire. There are groups alive today, that groups around, from the mid-century through today, that are still doing their darndest to try and keep that under wraps or minimize the reality of it.
Is that
For
because it undermines the regime, do you think?
it undermines the later regime, yeah, because like when Haile Selassie was toppled,
Yeah,
the
right.
people who came into power after that on both sides of the spec, right, both flavors of cult party, big Indian and little Indian,
Mhm.
have no interest in the Solomonic dynasty, or anything with that sort of pedigree, because again, if you got to make a whole new world order, you've got to erase the principal places where something is deep, as the places where things are most deeply rooted to the past.
Yes, makes
Um,
sense.
but this example of the Nestorian Christians is, I mean, the Nestorian Christians are still there today, right? They're basically centered in Baghdad, another place that was recently, annihilated in living memory. The Christian population in Iraq, and a basis in Iran, right around these areas, that was the epicenter of Nestorian Christianity. That encompassed much of the Indian church, and then up until a certain point in history, they had a sizable population in what we now call China today. And so you just go from monastery to monastery, diocese to diocese, you could travel along. So there's, as we were saying, just as Marco Polo was going from Venice to the east into these strange foreign lands, there was also delegation of, not related to Marco Polo, just happens to be around the same, within a century. A couple of Christian monks Nestorian Christian monks who are Chinese ethnically, going from China to the west, right, out to
Mm.
Rome, which is what they call Greece, Constantinople, right, the Byzantine Empire, and out that way. And I think even they get received possibly even into the court of France, because they wanted to come see the Bishop of Rome, but they realized that the King of France has way more power and influence at that point in time, so they go and hang out with him for a while, that kind of stuff, and then they eventually
Yeah.
make their way back. So it's all, there's this wonderful great account of it, but it's one of those things that you just find in the back of a library in the University of Cambridge somewhere, because it's
Hmm.
just it hasn't had a publisher give it the proper attention, which is why I intend to do that. So
Oh, is that
on
part
the
of what you
list,
want to write on?
yeah. So this is one of the things I'm going to republish, essentially,
Yeah.
beef up the translation, because all these things were done very, very quickly. There was a movement in the 1800s, among English scholars of like Near Eastern culture, ancient Near Eastern culture, to like uncover this, because they uncovered all of these ways. The British Empire, right, really invests in this area of the Middle East and Far East. They've got all these Christian documents. Like, cool, this is great. Let's put a bunch of people on the task of translating them into English.
Hmm.
And so you get these really like intern level translations, because you got a guy who knows 27 languages,
Yeah.
enough, well enough to make it into workable English. His theology, so he's able to translate in a specialized way, really weak, right? And so it's just really quick translations. The guy's prodigious, like what's his name, Wallace Budge, right? He does a
Oh, yeah,
bunch
yeah,
of
the
these,
Egyptian guy. Yeah.
right? All across, from Egypt through the Near East and Middle East. He does a bunch of these. Him and there's the team of others like him, prodigious, like profound skill, like breadth of skill, but
Yeah.
not really usable for any. It's usable to scan, if you know the original language, to scan through it to find what you're looking for in the original text, right? Because it's quicker that way.
Hmm.
But it's not like a workable, meaningful translation, and it's far from, say, theologically accurate to the original source. But
Huh.
those things could be done in a better way, in my opinion, and make them and release them for the popular level.
And that hasn't happened yet.
That hasn't happened yet. I mean, I recently, actually not came across, I've got a whole list of these. I recently published the Lost Letters of St. Anthony the Great, right? For
Oh.
the last 1300 years, we've assumed in the West that St. Anthony was, in fact, like illiterate, right? Because Athanasius says he was an unlettered peasant, or
Hmm.
he was uneducated or something like that. We take that to be unlettered, which then becomes, well, he couldn't even read or write, right? Actually, if you read the story, you find he comes from a really well-to-do family, right? He's living on a aristocratic estate, and he sells that and gives the proceeds to support his sister, putting her in a monastery, and he goes off to live in the desert. But yeah, he wrote letters, turns out. There's this whole manuscript tradition that's been kept, copied, and translated by Coptic Christians in Egypt that was put, and that hasn't even existed in English up until maybe 20 in the last 20, 30 years. It was translated poorly into English and incompletely. They didn't have the complete set. But just in the last 5-10 years, it's been translated into other European languages, first French and then into Italian. And then I've taken that and translated that into workable modern English. And all of that's been in academic circles, right? So then I take that and put that into anybody off the street could pick it off the shelf and read it. So that's just been published as well.
Crap, I'll pick it up off the shelf and buy it for you, son.
I recommend it. I think it's just cool. Like, cool. You got letters from St. Anthony, right? The father of monasticism.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, it's interesting to me because I'm, me, I'm not like an anti-colonialist or anything like that. I'm not like down with the patriarchy, but I do find myself now increasingly aware of the attempt to make a distinctly Anglo-centered history and culture, in at least in our local sphere,
Right.
and a lot of the stuff that gets blotted out is quite, I don't know, it's amazing to me what gets blotted out. Why would you not want to learn about this, or why would you not want to learn about that? Well, primarily because it makes the King of England look worse, or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah, whoever it happens to be.
Yeah, whoever it happens to be, right.
But then if the current reigning King of England is half Greek Orthodox, right?
Good point. Well, he was German, wasn't he, for a while?
Yeah, that was it. Was his, one of the Georges, right? Couldn't speak a lick of English. He wasn't very popular either. He didn't particularly give a damn about England. So I mean, I can see maybe there's just some backlash from that.
Maybe so.
But maybe it's not the United Kingdom we're talking about either.
It also might be
this whole notion that you're right, English Christian, like English speaking Anglophone Christians are the only Christians, to say like American megachurch evangelicals are the only real Christians, is of course a big problem, right? As non-evangelicals know. But that attitude though goes back to the 1400s, right? That the Latin Church is the only church, the Church of Rome is the only one, right? Yeah. Totally to like ignoring all of history for the last 1,500 years up to that point, that no, actually, there are other churches. There's the Church of Constantinople, the Church of Alexandria in Egypt, this Church of Antioch, and each of them
Celtic
have daughter churches.
The Celtic Church of
the Celtic Church gets absorbed into the Latin Church fairly early on. Yeah. But there's still that resistance, even among the Gauls and Franks into the 16th century, 17th century, right? These attempts at the Gallicanism, right? We're all taught like, oh, that's really bad, just like Anglicanism. Oh, well, obviously really bad. Well, actually, those are kind of like the vestigial reactions of a much longer history of difficulty assimilating.
Yeah, I found out about this first one. I found out about the tonsure controversy that occurred under Gregory the Great, I think it was.
Yeah,
and the Irish and the Scottish monks shaved their heads differently. And there's always like, why the hell would you have a conflict with Rome over how you did your hair? That's just gay, But no,
we'll come around to that some other time.
Yeah, you'd be wrong if you thought that. The Celtic monks would shave that front of their head and keep the back part long, and even tie things into it, jewels and stones and feathers and things. And the Gallic, as you say, the Frankish monks tonsured the top of their head, And I found out that has to do to some degree with the belief of the coming of the Holy Spirit, how one encounters the Holy Spirit, and that the tonsure is actually a way of getting an open window to the Holy Spirit. And
sure, that fits with the later Western kind of cosmology. That's interesting. That's interesting.
And the other one,
just to riff on that, to build on that point, so people understand you, like, whereas in the Byzantine, so the Constantinopolitan churches, the practice is that tonsure means no razor shall touch your head anymore. Like you become essentially Nazarites, right? The monastic practice
Oh, so
for
they have a huge
the
flow.
Greeks and Slavs is long flowing hair, long
Yeah,
flowing beard.
yeah, yeah.
Is you don't trim at all. And these are like actually massive, I think their hair, not only I think they're heretics, I think they're not really Christian, sort of fights between different groups over this. Because
Sorry.
there's like you indicated, there's an underlying theology to the
Yeah.
symbolism of these things.
So so they were heretics.
Uh-huh.
Ah.
That's right. That's why you stick with us, folks.
That's right.
Gems like that.
No, but there is an underlying theology behind it. And so it was more like that was the surface level of a much deeper controversy that was going on. And I think the controversy, especially with the Celts, had to do with the power. Where was the power going to be located? Was the power going to be located in Rome and you do what I say, or is the power going to be located in the monastery, local monastery, the local
Right.
abbey, or whatever it was? I think that's what it was about ultimately.
Yeah, which is fundamentally, what we've mostly learned from the Jesuit-controlled Jesuit founded, right, Western education about the history of the church
Yeah.
is that there was, a certain point in history when the Greek church decided they were going to break away from Rome, right? And that was that. Where in reality, there was for hundreds of years this growing tension all
Yep.
across
Yep.
Greek and Roman Christendom over that fundamental question. Where is
Yeah.
power? Is power centrally located, or is it situated in the local bishops? Or in the case of
Yes.
certain places like Ireland, and that I mean also much of Scotland, right? The Gaelic cultures,
Yep.
that is to say, situated in the monasteries, right, where bishops were functionaries within a monastery, because it's a fundamentally monastic kind of church. Is it situated locally? So localism versus centralism.
There you
And
go.
and that tension was obviously playing out between the Celtic churches and the seat of Rome. That was playing out between the Greek and Slavic churches and the seat of Rome. So essentially, Rome kind of and we look at it, we realize Rome innovated this. This was in this notion of a central control was an innovation, frankly. It was an innovation with Gregory the First, one of the Gregs, right?
Yep.
Innovation with one of the
Right.
Gregories. And it grew in the telling, essentially, to the date, to the era of Hildebrand Gregory, with, what is it, Henry the Emperor, whatever comes and does his
Yeah. Right.
penance,
Yes. Henry. Yep.
that was kind of the final nail in the coffin on a notion of, a decentralized, not even decentralized, but localist sort of model for the church in the West, except obviously in Britain that wasn't fully accepted because
No.
that's still essentially in practice, if not in law, the case by the time King Henry VIII shows up, who
Hmm.
already is, for all intents and purposes, effective head. He has veto power, various things. He appoints bishops, blah, blah, blah. He's effectively the functioning head of the church in England already under the Pope. So his shift was simply to say, no longer under the Pope, just autonomous, right? Um, but
Yeah.
in the,
That whole
but I guess
structure.
that was
Sorry.
an ongoing thing, right? That we still struggle with in the West, even into the 16th, 17th, 16th century, right? And that the Greeks. So that's where even the Greek Orthodox today, will look at, say, the history of Britain, and say, well, there's much more of an Orthodox sentiment in England, at least up until the Normans come in, right? Because the Normans are, I mean, William the Conqueror's invasion of England didn't come without papal funding, too, right?
Oh,
That was involved,
totally. It was totally people funded and backed and blessed and blah blah blah.
right? And so they say, well, England was effectively Orthodox. From their the reading of some scholars is like, well, England was effectively still Orthodox at least up until that point. It may have
Hmm.
been afterwards, definitely was before that. Because there was a shift in Christianity at that point, to the degree that some English scholars at the time of, say, Tolkien, uh, for example, to pick some, headbutting that was going on at Oxford, claim that the Anglo-Saxons were effectively not Christian. They were basically pagans, and it's a good thing the Normans came and Christianized them. To which Tolkien essentially says, "Shut up,"
Yeah,
It's bollocks.
That's not
It doesn't
true.
hold.
So,
That's not true at all. That's patently not true. But Christianity did radically change
yeah, it did.
in Britain at the time.
Which is ironic because, of course, Henry VIII was the one who split from Rome and tried to centralize the church in England. And in doing so, he went back to Anglo-Saxon culture in order to show, hey, we've always been independent from Rome, and we're going to revivify this, and we're going to start Anglo-Saxon studies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So when he goes to revivify Anglo-Saxon culture, it's in order to support his centralization of Christianity and power under his throne. I find that really ironic.
It is
Really ironic.
ironic because, of course, one of the main things he does is eliminate the monasteries. He guts the
Yeah, right.
abbeys,
Burns them.
which is, of course, the pillar and foundation of Anglo-Saxon Christianity. And so,
So
the
I
golden
don't know.
age was marked precisely by these huge abbey centers of learning and culture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he guts them and gives them to some petty noblemen that you then have a romantic TV series on.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Downton,
Nice job,
Downton
Henry.
Abbey. Yeah.
Win for our team, right? I don't know whether or not the tendency to centralize and to, so I would say, clean up history. I don't know whether that's due to a Roman or a Frankish, like a Goth thing, or whether that's just human nature, because it may be that same thing has been done over and over again, centralizing of power, under the Babylonians, for instance, or the centralization of power under Philip of Macedon and Alexander the Great. So maybe it may be that it's happened over and over in history.
I mean, you might be right. I think there might be something to that. I mean, again, to go back to my dear friend Oswald Spengler,
Yeah, right.
at least with the framework of cycles, that would just to say that would effectively fit his system of these great cycles of different
Yes,
civilizations,
yes, it
where
would.
remembering that Rome isn't a civilization stands on itself, it's the later age of the Greco-Roman civilization,
Yeah.
right? So this strong centralization of power that comes at the end of that, and like you say earlier, you've got other examples of that, and it's the centralization of power within the papacy, and ultimately in a global Caesarist system that we have, starting with Napoleon, would start that strong central administrative aspect, but
Mm,
the precursors of it, yeah, in the 15th, 16th century for sure.
mm, mm, mm. Well, I mean, things run smoother when you've got a single hand at the wheel, I suppose, and you get the trains to run on time and the streets get
Exactly
clean.
right.
That's
Which
nice.
is the mark of a mechanization of society, which means it's no longer
Yeah,
organic, right? You shift from the organic because organic stuff is dirty and it poops,
yeah, yeah,
and it's less predictable, to something that's more predictable, more mechanical.
yeah.
And that's interestingly enough, that is what in Spengler's system, that's how he, at least some of the indicators, or some of this spiritual change that happens as a civilization grows and starts to go into decline, it starts to mechanize itself more and more. And then when
Interesting.
you've got a mechanistic paradigm, you're absolutely right. If it's
Yeah.
mechanistic, which should be central control so that we can run all the trains on time.
Yeah, so I see Charlemagne, for instance, in his consolidation under the throne there at La Chapelle. I see that sort of like a glorified HOA system, a homeowners
Mm-hmm.
association, where like you clean up your streets or we'll put you in jail, that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
that all works when we're trying to have a nice, clean, decent civilization where everybody can get to work on time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What it does do, though, is it seems to eradicate elements of knowledge and elements of history and eradicate certain freedoms and certain ability to do things that you want to do rather than what the state or whatever wants you to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a, I don't know, I hate to use the term, but it's a catch-22 where either you have the neat, clean, decent order, uh, or and lack of freedom, or you have the chaotic, strange, and unpredictable civilization that doesn't make a ton of money, and yeah, and yet is very free. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there
I mean,
was
that's
there was a
right.
great story. Sorry,
Yeah.
there's a great
Was it?
story by Ursula Le Guin called "The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas." Have you ever read that?
No, I've never heard that.
I'll send you the link. But
Please
this
do.
it's a really interesting story along this line because she was a radical, and she was always doing things to stick it to the man, which, whatever, it's 1960s. So, But this
Uh-huh.
story of the ones who walk away from Omelas, in essence, it's just a short sketch of a story, but it's a story where you have a perfect society, and everybody's happy and clean and neat. That's what we've been talking about. The only problem is that they have a scapegoat. They got a child locked in a dungeon, and everybody comes to beat up the child and to spit on the child.
Okay.
And at a certain point, each citizen has to be brought to see this pathetic child that's kept in a dungeon somewhere, and then they make the decision either they stay in Omelas and become part of the abuse of this child, or they leave. And that's the end of the story. It's not like a fleshed out story,
Yeah,
but it's an
yeah,
interesting little reflection from the Wind's 12 Quarters about how do we deal with this perfect society problem that is a perfect society at the expense of the outliers or at the expense of those who don't want to conform or those, the people that we have to get rid of in order to make that perfect society. She was very much against that. And I can't help but
yeah.
think to some degree this has to do with abortion, but it may
Mm,
also have to do with just the general abuse of anybody who is on the fringes of the society, which, just to conclude my little bit here, is really contrary to what the original Christian message is. Because the original
right.
Christian message, as far as I can tell, is that all the animals can come into the blanket. All the outliers are part of this. They're all part of the Church of God. In fact, as Nietzsche says, it was a religion for losers. So there's something to that. It's like if since everybody's a loser, it's a religion for everybody. But if
Right.
you're going to have the centralized society, you have to do what Hitler did and make a positive Christianity because the regular Christianity just won't cut it.
Mm-hmm.
Which does kind of lead me to, and I wasn't intending this, but it does kind of lead me to what something you had wanted to talk about,
Dum-ba-da.
dun,
Hey.
dun, dun, which is this thing here, The Pardoner's Tale.
Partner's Tale.
And as a shameless self-promotion, I published this back July 29th, 2026 at my Substack. Please go there and give me some change. Um,
Right.
but
Check it out.
yeah, The
It's
Pardoner's
definitely
Tale.
worth it.
Okay, so what do you want to talk about?
Well, I think you're spot on. I've read the thing, and and Mr. Lasher's absolutely, I think he's absolutely correct, and you'll have to read it to find out why.
Okay. Yep.
So
Yep.
that's that.
Yep.
No,
There.
I mean, I
Next
think
subject.
so. There's exactly two things that come to mind, and they're really the same thing. One is around the centralized society and a new Christianity, um, versus a dirty, icky, messy, decentralized, or at least I don't like the word decentralized because
No.
decentralized still assumes centralization as
Yeah.
the de
The center.
facto, and then you're like uncentering it. It's localist, right? Fractal localist Christianity,
Yeah.
um, which is not mean everybody comes up with their own doctrine dogma. Sorry, Protestants. It's just not like don't and sorry, hyper traddy Latins who
Yeah.
think
Same thing. Yep.
anything other than draconian control is somehow free range Protestantism. It's not. Because there's nothing to do with doctrine or dogma. It has to do with jurisdiction, right?
Yeah.
And there's what I would say there's two fundamental models as I've dived into the differences between the Roman Church and pretty much all other apostolic Christians, right, with the seven sacraments, same dogma, etc. So the churches of Antioch, the churches of Constantinople, church of Alexandria, and all of their daughter churches, is that they're fundamentally, on the whole, their model is more um, Jedi Master takes on Padawans. It's fundamentally more relational,
Yeah. Okay. That's a good way of looking
where
at it.
the Master excels at he's somebody goes out to the desert like St. Anthony the Great, practices in asceticism that he learns from Christ and the other elders, right? St. Anthony, the father of monasticism from other monks. He's the father of monasticism, but he's the first one, right? Actually, the fundamental premise for most of Christian history that again, one of the many things we've forgotten in the modern West is that the apostles were effectively monks, right? That they took on a monastic life in a way that not recognizable to like 16th century Benedictine abbeys, but that's the basic premise and the idea, and then that's been handed on, passed down one generation to the next, and so they've got a model which far more one of spiritual fatherhood or spiritual motherhood, right? Where you learn the way of Christian life from some wise elder. And they train, and it's not just for monks. This is generally the model. You see this really explicitly, of course, in the Brothers K, right? In the Brothers Karamazov,
Oh,
right?
yes.
And there's this wonderful interlude in there, the chapters on Abba Zosima, Father Zosima, the monk there. But that alone is worth worth reading. It really stands alone as a work within the Brothers K. But and then in the West, you had that, but it's very strongly attested to. Even Saint Benedict, or one of the Gregory the Great's biography of Saint Benedict very strongly attests to this in Benedict's own life. But at some point becomes more and more. I mean, this was with the shift of ecclesiology to a pyramid structure rather than a church of churches. It becomes more monolithic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where Christianity is about a code that's enforced by a global system of power, and we all just kind of follow the book, right? You have to follow the codex,
Yeah.
and that's enforced by the experts at hand. And that's what makes Protestantism that's what makes Protestantism like a thinkable thought. It's like, well, we could just do away with some of those people and just go by the book, right? And however you define that book and what other books might go along with it, German catechism for the German people kind of thing, you get this notion that's now detached, strictly speaking, from relationships. So you got these two models, right? You got these two models of Christianity. And the relationship one is that messy, localist, organic, less controlled thing. And that's the whole, and you see this phenomenon, especially in the Slavic variations of that. That's to say, the broader Russian, Polish, Ruthenian, Ukrainian areas, right? Bulgarian world, Romanian world. Sorry, Romania. I know you live you're in amphibious reality of both Latin, Mediterranean, and Slavic. No hard feelings. Do not get entangled up in that fight. But this is a big thing in Romania. Stay strong. You're good. They produce wonderful things like Dragostea din Te. But this song, that
Oh,
Numa Numa Numa
yeah.
hey,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, their gift to the world, as well as being one of the major publishing centers in the Middle Ages. Great scholars and revivalists of Orthodox Christianity. But the in Slavic Christianity, you have, and elsewhere, but really pronounced way, the idea of the holy fool. And that's this ascetic type person who basically looks like a homeless bum. And they go around. Sometimes they're pilgrims, sometimes they're not. But they're like a crazy guy, but they're a crazy guy for Christ, right? They're not actually on drugs. And what they say doesn't necessarily always make sense. And it's really bizarre. It's like it's pushing to the extreme end of the spectrum of the dirty, messy, uncontrolled sense of Christianity. And not
Yes.
everybody can be one, but you get one. And when you were writing on the Pardoner in Chaucer, that's all I couldn't get that image out of my head
Really
of the
interesting.
holy
Okay.
fool, who
Yeah.
oftentimes, because what they say, the way that they comport themselves is ultimately self-deprecating, right? It looks like Diogenes, but it's not motivated by Diogenes philosophy,
Mm-hmm. He was a cynic, I
right?
think. Is it
Well, he was, yeah. I mean, he's lived in a barrel, naked,
lived in a
masturbated,
barrel? Yeah.
pooped on the streets, right?
Yep.
Because fuck you all,
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
one of trust fund dumpster diver types. We see this every once in a while, right? Gutter punks back in the day. But they might live in a way that you're like, oh my God, but they're self-deprecating, and I think there might be something of that going on
There might be, if
with
I remember right,
Chaucer's partner.
wasn't there a character like that in Dostoevsky? I mean, if Zosima is the one character in the monastery, but there's another character in the monastery, if I remember right, who is very much like the Diogenistic character, and he's antithetical to Zosima, if I remember right. So even there, you have an element of that, like crazy, semi-crazy semi-possessed type character,
Mhm.
right?
If you yes, yes. If you want a really good look at it, there's the book Laurus by Vodolaskin. Eugene
Okay.
Vodolaskin is a modern writer. He writes a story where the main character lives as a holy fool for some period of his life. It's very, very, very detailed illustration of what that can look like.
Well, then yes, because that is very much what I had in mind when I was writing that article. In a nutshell, basically what I was proposing was that the character in Chaucer, the pardoner, is not just a lanky-haired sissy boy who's out for evil. He's actually, I think, a trope of a vision of the Christ that was predominant in medieval
Yes.
iconography, so to speak. And he represented, as the Holy Fool did, somebody who was either an outlier of society or stood in contrast to the excesses of wealth and self-indulgence and pleasure that society represented even back in the medieval era.
Mm-hmm.
So the character that I see there is in some ways more holy than the other characters that think that their prosperity is a sign of God's favor and that they can do what they wish with the rest of the world because they have all that wealth. You know?
Right.
And there's a lot there, including the fact that there is apparently an abundance of a painting and real iconography that shows exactly this. You
Yeah.
know, so yeah, that was a large portion of what I was thinking about, and it does kind of raise a broader question, which is, and this is perennial: are Christians supposed to stand as a counterbalance to that world of prosperity? Or can a Christian become prosperous, wealthy, powerful, even, you know, pro- kingly, and
Mm-hmm.
still claim to be a Christian? Or I guess you could say, can there be a Christian king, so to speak? Which is kind of a bigger question, but I think the
Yeah.
one that's intriguing.
Sure. Well, I mean, if history and the general consensus of Christians for throughout history is anything to base it off of, then the answer is, well, yeah, unequivocally, yes, obviously. One can be a Christian king. We've had many great Christian kings. We've had a lot of bad Christian kings. We've had probably more good than bad on the whole. So it's quite possible. I don't know many good Christian bankers are held up as examples, though.
Okay, see,
So
that's an interesting
there
point
might be
because
a difference in what we mean by wealth and
right, and
how
what we
it's
mean by
used.
king too, because
Right.
does king mean the king of England, or does king mean somebody who's just powerful and wealthy, or does king mean this Tolkien-esque sort of the king returns to
Right.
God?
Because do you have, you've got the King of Wessex or the King of Mercia,
Yes, right, yeah,
right? Something the size of like, I don't know, Cook County, Illinois, you
yeah.
know,
It's a postage
um,
stamp.
versus Jakob Fugger, who pulls the purse strings of half of Europe in in his era, with the head Medici, right? Like at some point, the King of England, is coming through on crusade, either to or returning uh, from it, and passes through Italy, and he's like he's poorer than your average Florentine, but he's the King of England, right?
Hmm,
At that point, he's got less money to his name,
hmm.
and so we have to. I mean, I think there's some paradigm shifts of where we stock value,
Yes.
how we think of the concept of value. And there's a guy who writes a lot about that. Very, very insightful. And I always
Come,
forget his name.
come to you when you need it least.
Yeah, he's a German thinker.
Hmm.
Um, and anyway,
I know
you
somebody
can
else
have
who
a
wrote
Christian.
on
Why,
this.
why couldn't you have a Christian king? Right? Why
Yeah, yeah,
couldn't you?
yeah,
I
yeah.
guess this is what it comes down
Well,
to.
I know somebody else who wrote on this, which is important, is Machiavelli.
Yeah.
Machiavelli's whole writing is about this very issue. Can you have a Christian king? And he says, no, you can't, because the Christian is evaluated by certain criteria that are not possible for somebody who is trying to maintain control of these various warring city-states and
Hmm.
civil war within a city itself.
Hmm.
You have to do certain things as a king, Machiavelli says,
You got to
which are
bust some
unchristian.
eggs.
No,
Yeah.
they're unchristian. And if you are a Christian, you have to do certain things that would not allow you to do the things that a king has to do. So he says, no, it's not possible at all. But
Yeah, I
that
think
may
that's
constitute a shift in Europe. See, that may constitute a shift in the whole thing.
I mean,
Because we're
certainly that's
talking,
very much the Renaissance spirit, right?
yes,
That
right, exactly,
the
right. We're
church
talking the
is one thing,
Renaissance.
but civil society is really, it's, we follow our own rules. And that's, you got the birth of civil law as
Yep,
something really different from not
yep,
just a different side of the same coin from ecclesiastical law
yep.
around that same
And
period.
you also had by Renaissance period, and part of the reason we have the Renaissance is you already had a split between the nominalist and realist conception of the world, which is pretty
Bingo.
huge. That's pretty huge.
Bingo. Come back to
Yeah.
the old dragon there.
Yeah, I know, I know.
I think that nails it because, you look at somebody like King Olaf, Saint Olaf,
Yep.
right? Um, People look at him today and they say, well, there's nothing saintly about him. My God, he went and hacked apart a bunch of heathens, with an axe and blah, blah, blah. Or this great saint, I think it's Saint Olga, of either Kiev or somewhere in there, right? The
Mm,
Russians. Because remember, up until the last 10, 15 years, it was okay to call all of them Russians because that's how they self-identified. It's only
mm,
modern nation state labels that are different. They're valid. They're real. But looking historically, right, she was some Russian saint. I don't know if that was based in Kiev, if that was based in Moscow, or what part of the greater Slavic peoples that was. But she did by modern standards really bad stuff,
hmm.
and is held up as this great glorious saint. Right. In part, okay, so she became a Christian at some point in there, it was like she did it as a Christian, but it's the whole, bury the guy up to his neck and let the fire ants eat his face kind of stuff. I mean, that level of, that's the part of the
Like
culture.
Vlad the Impaler.
Yeah. I mean, except
I mean,
in
no,
her case,
seriously.
she had just reasons for doing it. In her case, it was
Yeah.
women's lib. It was preventing herself from being overpowered by the various masculine machismo forces around her.
Mm,
To be fair,
yeah.
but where Vlad just did it for fun.
Okay. Good point.
Maybe I don't know. Maybe he didn't. Maybe there's something to that. Romanians, call me up. Let me know.
You're
We're
right.
back to
Here we go
them
again.
again. They've probably got the original letters that could say what's what. But yeah, so you obviously get good guys and bad guys, but I think the Machiavellian thesis depends on nominalism, depends on a
Yeah, it does.
split between words and reality.
Yeah, it does.
Because prior to that, I just don't know that prior to the 12th century, anybody in Europe would see a conflict with yep, sometimes you gotta break some eggs. And that doesn't make you any less Christian because we all break eggs. And here's maybe the thing that comes back to the partner. We all do atrociously horrible things to one another on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's in the modern, at least post nominalism, maybe especially now, it's easy to say it's those kings, right? If we just
Yeah.
got rid of all the kings, that would solve the problem. We scapegoat, they become the little kid in the outhouse that we can go and beat the tar out of anytime we want to.
Interesting. Yeah. But it's
Right.
also the problem is also that I think all of us humans generally have a tendency to rewrite history to fit it to the current narrative, our current view of things. So
Oh, absolutely.
because nominalism, I hate to admit it, but nominalism triumphed to a great
Yeah.
degree.
Hook, line,
And
and sinker.
therefore, every king prior to 1278 was motivated by the same materialistic, unifying, if you will, vision that was part of Henry VIII's vision, or what have you. All of them were motivated, obviously, right? Going as far back as Akhenaten, all of them were about power and about acquiring land and tromping their enemies and just exacting their will on everybody around them. Now,
Mm.
that's pardon me, but what I just said, that's patently not true. It really is not true. Okay.
Bingo.
But there's a tendency because we live in that current era to inflict that viewpoint on past eras in a sort of
Yes.
anachronistic way, and therefore not be able to see that certain characters in history might have been motivated very much by the desire to be as just as possible, even though they were kings. You know?
Right. We're so damn cynical,
Yeah, yeah.
as though
Tom, Thomas
everybody felt like
Paine,
we did.
who I love Thomas Paine. But he was wrong in his assessment of kings because he was trying to make the point that the kings, all of them were bandits, glorified bandits.
Hmm.
And it's just not right. It's not true. I mean, George III might have been a glorified bandit, but
He might have been, but even then, I don't think most people, I don't even think most people in his day would have thought he was. They would have said Parliament was, and that was the problem,
oh yeah,
which is
yeah, that's an
interesting,
interesting point.
right? Which
Yeah.
is interesting because, but Thomas Paine is living off of the headwinds of the parliamentarian
Yeah.
cause. So,
Yeah.
um, but no, I think it's really interesting. My understanding of, by the way, from a scholar who's done a lot of research on personal correspondence of Thomas Paine and the early revolutionaries,
Mm.
is that Thomas knew damn well that wasn't true. But he also knew where his paycheck was coming from.
Yeah.
Uh, and so
Interesting. Interesting.
take it with a grain. I don't know, right? But that's what I'm told. I
I
wasn't
wouldn't be
there. I
surprised.
wasn't there, but this guy evidently was.
Yeah, right. I mean, Thomas Paine and Sam Adams and others were like they were the agitators. They were the
Yeah,
revolutionaries. They were the muck rakers of their day. So
yeah. And so,
that's not surprising to me.
but I think you're absolutely right. Like we want to say, oh, let's see all these, people with power or people who succeed must have. We just take a cynical bend on it, right? They were clearly power hungry. They clearly were forcing their will on others. I think there's a couple of different things going on there. One is, in general, this is the problem when we look historically, is we pick one particular point relatively recent to us and project that back as the way things always were up until that point.
Yeah, right.
We'll pick like Louis the Sun King, who's really, it's not Louis who gets his head cut off. That's the problem. It's the guy two kings back,
Yep.
right? Or two Louis back that caused the trouble that the young kid inherited the death, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what it is. Like Marie Antoinette wasn't really so much of a terrible person as the newspapers of her era made her sound. Most of that was actually just racist because she was Austrian,
Yeah,
but
Austrian,
and
right.
and a woman, so misogynistic. What was
Yes.
the other guy? But we take like this 17th century absolutist rule as the way, like that's just what kingship always was, right? So we say that that's
Yeah.
what these people always have been like. And then I think on the other level, we look at our own motivations today and we say, well, effectively, that's what I would do if I were in power. Or if we're less honest, we say, well, that's what I think my neighbor would do if he were in power. So therefore, right. So we judge based on the paradigm of what we think is likely based on the people that we know.
Yeah, yeah,
And we
yeah.
project that back into history. We have no way of wrapping up, unless you're really educated. I mean, unless you're wise, this is you've steeped yourself in different ways of thinking and
More wise than
experiences. But
educated.
yeah, exactly. The more educated you are, maybe the harder it is. But if you're a wise old uneducated farmer, you might have an
Yeah.
easier time with this.
Yeah, yeah.
To say, I don't know, man. Maybe the guy who says he's actually motivated by what he believes to be a divine vision told him to do a thing. Maybe that's just legitimately his motivation for doing a thing. He wants to please the gods,
Yeah.
right? And that's really what he thinks he's doing. We don't need to take a cynical bent on it.
And he may be wrong, right?
Mhm.
Like what's his name from the Mormons, right? Sorry, Mormons.
Yeah.
You may be wrong, but Brigham Young might have really thought that he was being visited, and maybe he was. I don't know. He was visited by something. There's a high possibility that his finding of those tablets. Okay, maybe he made the tablets, but the finding of the tablets may have been something which was a outward vehicle for expressing something that he really deeply felt spiritually, and was really motivated by. So it's not the first time. I mean, Savonarola was a similar guy back there in the medieval era, and he
Absolutely
was
right.
deeply motivated.
And another great example, Savonarola and his, spiritual father, Saint Francis,
Yep.
um, very much, rejecting wealth, authority, power, the system, the man, what have you. And actually, I think it's a very interesting way to we've got the garden statue version of Saint Francis in our minds a
Yep.
lot. Well, you got to realize that like Saint Francis was a dirty, uncontrolled hippie bum he lived out where the bandits and
Yeah.
brigands lived, and he got
He
beat
was the
up and he
holy fool.
laughed about it. He's kind of a little bit BDSM, right? We'd read him
Yeah.
today, be like, had some suppressed queer issues,
Yeah. And
right? Is the way people today would see him,
you're a bit of weirdo.
because he effectively is embodying, among other things. I mean, I think really the motivation, his paradigm that he's following is fundamentally Syriac monasticism, and there's a lot of
Yeah. Interesting.
reasons
Yeah.
precedent wise why that's the case,
Yeah.
particularly where he's living at the time. There are some direct influences there, but but in many ways, he's living like what we later call the Holy Fool in the
Yes, right.
Slavonic
Yes,
tradition.
exactly. Yeah.
Um,
And that
and he's
image
just
of the
absolutely
Holy Fool.
nuts. He's going around
Yeah.
singing naked, and
Yep.
people beat him up, and he laughs.
Yeah.
So
That would he yeah,
that's
it's
Francis, right? And we've
weird.
canonized him even in the West, and we
Yeah,
tried
put
to,
him in our
we've tried to
gardens.
Bowdlerize him as well. It's really hard. We've tried our hardest.
Well, my brother will tell you more about Saint Columba. He was a similar character. Columba
Oh,
was
dude, yeah,
weird, but
going
yeah,
out hanging out
now
with
he's
mermaids and all that stuff.
yeah, exactly. But now he's that holy, Scottish pious saint. Yeah, exactly. Saint Columba.
Yeah,
So yeah, hmm, I think that's a lot of what I was going at in that article, and it does bring up something which I've been reflecting on for quite some time. The more you find out about history and symbolism and the like, the more you find weird things that crop up and then disappear. They crop up, they disappear because they don't work, or people can't accept them, or they're too hard a truth to bear, or whatever it is. And I think this is one of those issues.
yeah.
It stands right up there with the issue of the what is it, the Eastern depictions of Mary, the severe depictions of Mary, versus the Renaissance soft, feeding
Mm,
from the breast Mary, because
right.
pictures of Mary as the cult of Mary was rising, most of them were pretty severe. Her Theotokos, is that right? Theotokos?
Yeah, the Theotokos is defined. She's like one of the principal titles in the most prominent ritual
Yeah.
in the Greek Orthodox Church is the battle general,
Yes. Yeah. Right.
right? She's the stration.
Dration, and very severe as far as Western sensibilities go, I suppose.
Yeah.
And when you compare her to one of those Renaissance Marys, beautiful and kind of voluptuous and offering her breast to the little infant Christ who's like pontificating on her lap,
Yeah.
it's a really radical contrast. And I think a lot of people in the West, well, let's be blunt, modern America, they don't want to look at that severe image of the Stratici. That's not that. No, that's not what they want to see. There's another one. If you ever want to kick, you go and you look for the what's the terminology of it now? It's basically Osiris in an excited state of existence,
Mhm.
to make this a family channel.
That's right.
Um,
Osiris the
and
sophomore.
yeah, Osiris ready for action, so to speak.
That's right.
And the same image carries over into Christianity, strangely enough, because there's a whole book of this called "The Sexuality of Christ in Renaissance Art and Modern Oblivion," I think it's called.
Mm.
And he talks about
Mhm.
how this whole image cropped up sometime in the late medieval, early Renaissance, where artists tried to depict a similar thing. It utterly failed,
Yeah.
and people abandoned it. And nobody wants to talk about that now, that reality that was actually a thing.
Mhm.
So I think that this image of the holy fool, or of the pardoner, I think Chaucer was trying to embody something which was in his own neighborhood, it was in his own culture, which after Chaucer dropped out of existence almost entirely. I mean, I can't think of anywhere that we actually depict this in a, shall we say, legitimate Christian way. Um,
Yeah. No, I mean,
yeah.
I think you're right. I think it's totally gone from modern Western take on Christianity.
Mm.
And I think Chaucer's partner is just that. And I think, you line up Chaucer's partner and you put the real Saint Francis next to that,
Yes.
right? Where we just celebrated, yes, yesterday or today, right? Is the great indulgence of the Portiungola, right? You can go to this place and all your sins and debts for those sins get remitted, right? Because that's the
Mm.
system in the Church of Rome at the time. Is the Sumner side of things, right?
Yes.
You committed certain kinds of sins. There are physical criminal law punishments that now have to be applied to you. And if you go to this one particular shack, on the plains below, this hill town in the middle of podunk nowhere, Italy, because that's really what Assisi is. The
Hmm.
plains of Perugia down below it. All your sins will get forgiven, and they can't touch you, right? It's a start over fresh, clean card. And the Pope's like, yeah, sure, whatever, right? And let's Francis do this. You're nuts. This will never keep. Um, and then Francis like begs this permission from the Pope for this special thing. That's that's really bizarre. But if
Yeah.
the but like clearly Francis' motivation is like people need their sins forgiven, so I do it, even
Yeah.
though I don't necessarily bathe regularly. I'm not pleasant to be around, you know. People might
I
call me
have
a namby-pamby. I
right.
sing
Uh,
songs in French as I twaddle down the road.
Nigra
Um,
sum sed formosa est,
that's right. And
which in the
so,
vernacular, right?
yeah, exactly. To put it in the vulgar tongue.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
I don't, I wonder if, yeah, I mean, I think that and the Holy, the whole, the partner, Francis and the Holy Fool, we see maybe more clearly with Francis and the Holy Fool, maybe the partner's really meant to be part of that same kind of
I wouldn't be
type.
surprised.
In which
Yeah.
case, you can't take anything he says about himself as necessarily true
No.
because he's obviously self-deprecating,
Yes.
because he's hide in a way that isn't like humble brag, where it's you see through like he's really just a braggart. He's actively obfuscating any merit you might impute to him, but even if you understood his real motivations, you couldn't comprehend them because they're too gratuitous. They're so gratuitous, it might feel, well, flippant or
Yeah.
pornographic.
Yes. And here's another thing too, to add to what you just said, because I think you're right, you're spot on. If I remember right, and this is going from memory, so I'm not going to check it immediately, his story, the story that he tells,
Mhm.
is a unique story in the course of the Chaucerian cycle, so to speak.
Mhm.
Um, it reflects back to, I think, what motivates the Holy Fool in the first place, which is that I think the Holy Fool, I think Francis or any people like that, have so powerful a vision of human suffering or so powerful a vision of what hell looks like that they do anything they can to shake people out of their complacency so they don't go there. I think that's the whole motivation, right? It's
Yeah.
not just that they don't bathe, it's that they have so many other things they're trying to do that they forget to bathe, or it's just not something they think is important. The whole importance hierarchy is shifted for people like that. Um, and I think that the story that he tells reflects back on his own vision of what he has seen. Every one of these, it's interesting to Chaucer, and I would have loved to seen the full work. This is not a complete work, the tales. Every character was going to tell two stories. No, yeah, two stories, right? So
Mm.
what would the companion story have been for the partner? The story that he does tell, if I remember right, is the story of the three robbers that try to avoid death. They try to
Yes.
kill death, basically.
Yep.
And turns out they can't, to put it mildly, and all of them end up dead.
Yes.
What does one make of that in terms of the vision that this guy has had? What is the motivating factor in that story? Um, I tend to think that he's commenting on the idea that everybody is trying to avoid death or overcome death or kill
Uh-huh.
death. Death will cease to be, will transfer our consciousness to machines, and then everything will be perfect, that kind of thing. We'll get Medicare perfect, um, whatever it
That
is.
so one could say that the partner's tale is all about the fall, mortality, and the machine.
Absolutely.
To say
Absolutely, I think
basically
it
it's
is.
Tolkien,
Yes,
right?
yes, I think it is.
And
Yes,
that's really interesting.
because there's
Whoa.
no way for them to avoid it ultimately.
Because you've got two things that you get from the partner. One is his prologue, where he talks about all the
Yeah.
dirty, nasty things he does to screw
Hmm.
people over out of their money.
Yep. Yep.
Make them kiss my pig bones because they ain't real
You're
relics.
right. Yeah.
And then there's the story that he tells about these three guys that try and overcome death. And it doesn't work,
Yeah.
obviously, because you might be a king or a little street sweeper. Pretty soon you get to dance with the Reaper, in the
Right.
words of
Yeah.
Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Um, we cite all sorts of things here.
That's a
Uh,
classic.
very,
That is a
very
classic.
authoritative, actually. Strongly recommend just that particular bit of fighting death because it's a riff on the real work, which is Ingmar Bergen's The Seventh Seal.
Yes.
And I think, what do we make of it? I think that in some part that, the seventh seal, right? The chess game with death,
Yeah, on the beach.
not to save himself ultimately, but to get someone else a pass when death is otherwise distracted, right? I mean, I think, and he's trying to atone for his wrong deeds, not just get out of trouble.
Yeah, yeah.
And I wonder how, like, what if we looked at the seventh? I think it would be worth doing, watching the seventh seal with the partner's tale in mind, and
Mm,
say, it'd be interesting to put those two together in the same dish and see how they come out.
mm.
Um, Along with anything by Tarkovsky, right? I mean,
Yeah,
this is
right.
right. I think that's the other one that came to mind when I was reading your article on the partner's tales. Like, feels very him. Is that's his name, right? The Russian filmmaker. That's
Tartovsky, yes, with
Tarkovsky. Yeah,
Solaris. Hmm.
yeah. I mean, it's not pleasant to look at always, but it's a thing like the Summoner, I think, or not the
Yes,
Summoner. Summoner's bad. We don't like him. He's bad
you're right.
news.
It's like
The
the
Summoner's
partner.
bad news, but the partner,
Well,
the
that's also another
indulgencier,
interesting point. The summoner is somebody who says you have to go and repent.
right?
Go now, I'm
Namely,
summoning
like,
you.
you have to go pay money for this
Pay
thing.
money
It's
for it. Yeah.
you must be punished. You must be punished.
What is the partner doing? Well, he's got pardons for people, and he's giving them out pretty much, yeah, left and right.
Sometimes for
He's got
money.
he's got relics
Hmm.
for people, and makes them feel much better about themselves, and they change their lives because they kiss the holy knuckle bones of Saint, whatever.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter that they're pig bones in some ways. I mean, that's people focus on that all the time. Oh, he's a fraud. He's a fraud. He's a fraud. This is a strange thing to me because so much of the relic world in Catholicism is alien to me. Because I
Hmm.
was Anglican originally and
Hmm.
converted, family converted, so it's an alien sort of thing. But there's a great deal of questionable reliquary stuff, and yet people, change their lives for it.
I
And
think,
um,
yeah.
and then his home life, his parish. It's a decent place. People love him there, and he gives great sermons,
Hmm.
which says a lot about him, right?
That's even to this day not a common trait.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. So
but yeah, because I mean, I think we could say two things about the relics. One is, I'm, we could say that he's indicating it doesn't really matter if they're, you know, St. Jimmy's knucklebones or if they're pig bones, because the point is people converted, repented, and changed their life.
that's the main point.
Or we could see him also as an unreliable self-narrator, which I think is also true, right?
Sure.
Fundamentally, he's not reliable. I'm not saying everything he says is a lie. He's just not reliable. It's the nature of a
But
holy
the,
fool, right?
but the two
Anything
are
he
not
says about himself,
contradictory.
the whole point is to take the focus off himself
Yeah,
in talking
and
about himself.
and the two are not
Um,
contradictory either,
yeah, they're not contradictory.
which
Absolutely,
raises another
because
thing about
the whole
Chaucer, which I find intriguing. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
which is the
Go
whole
ahead.
thing is to be not self-reflective, right? He's not absorbed in his own self, and he's not absorbed in his neighbor.
Yeah,
The one thing that's like, word count wise repeated through it is has to do with people's pardon, forgiving their sins. If you ignore the other trappings, you say, well, maybe that's actually his central theme, and everything
yeah,
else is distraction.
yeah. And the whole fraudulent thing or the unreliable narrator. Um, I think frequently people want to put religion into a box. They want to see God as they want to see him. They want to see themselves as justified because it makes them feel good.
Mhm.
And that's a dangerous place to be because you're trapped. It's a mind trap. It's a mind forged manacle, as William Blake calls it. And everything you do is perfect because it's God's will.
Mhm.
As we see in some of the characters, the wife of Bath and others, they're doing God's will. The nun's priest,
Oh yeah.
um, and the summoner even, and the partner. Yeah, they're unreliable, but they are, like you said, they are using, or he is using whatever is available in order to break people out of that self-complacency, in order to break them out of that sense that they're in the right or that God's in the box. And
Right.
ultimately, this is something which raises a very deep theological question with Chaucer. If it's What is it connected to, I suppose, is the thing. Is any of the flim flam that we have surrounding religion, is any of it uh, true? Or is any of it, maybe a better way to put it is any of it really connected to what we think it's connected to? Or is it a prod or a spur to get us to get out of that box to think that we control everything and we know God's will and we have religion in a little box? I think it's actually the latter. I think that all the services and the relics and even some of the doctrine and the teachings are there in order to prompt us to think about things in a different way or to act a different way or to repent, metanoia, basically. They shouldn't be there in order to simply bolster us up and show us that we're the best person in the whole wide world and that our everything we think is perfect. That's not what it should be. And yet most people seem to take it that way. Oh, this conforms exactly with my little worldview, so therefore it must be true. But
Right.
this
It
little
feels.
starving peasant over here, they make me feel uncomfortable, so I'm not going to pay attention to them.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's exactly
Anyway,
right.
it's a question which really intrigues me, not just with that story, but with all the stories in Chaucer.
Yeah, I
And to be
think it's
honest, it
true.
intrigues me with religion in general because, Christianity is 2,000 years old and humanity's been around for what, 150,000 years?
Something like
So,
that. Latest
what do you do
count,
with
yeah.
that?
Right. Yeah. To shock you out of, and it's not to say though that I think that just anything that shocks you out of complacency is a helpful thing,
No.
right? Because there have been movements throughout the history of the church, as with other cultures, where we go to that, this extreme of like just shake them up, gonna
Hmm.
freak out,
Hmm.
and that doesn't, or a revolution, right? That's not actually helpful. But there are certain kinds of things that are incomprehensible to us, so we kind of like lump them all together. Certain kinds of things incomprehensible to us are actually for our good,
Yes.
and
And
we
you
don't
suddenly
need to
say, I
make
never thought
sense
about
of
God
them
that way.
precisely
I
because we
never.
can't make sense of them.
Yeah.
Something like the resurrection, like rising from the dead.
Just to take something, out of
Just
the blue.
to take something. It's freaking weird, man.
Yeah.
Um, right. But it is, and that's the whole call to repentance. I think exactly that is not, here's a formula by which you can do X, Y, and Z and all these things and keep living, and then you go back to living the way that you're doing, and you'll just be like cleansed, brother.
Yes.
But like you gotta radically change your life, which means the big part of repentance is not just change your life to, because if you were just supposed to just change your life, you get to pick how you're going to change your life and what you're going to change it to. You're still in control,
Yep.
which means you're still the center of your own universe. Whereas the holy fool is there as an example of not in control of anything,
Yep.
right? Which is
Yeah.
true. I'm not.
Yeah. That's a very hard doctrine to swallow. That we are not the center of the universe, that we're not in control, that
Uh,
actually maybe we could like snuff it in the next few minutes.
right. Because if
And if
Ray
we thought about
Bradbury's
that all the
right,
time, we'd go nuts, right? We'd
today's the
be a
day.
holy fool. There was a
Yeah.
ship, right?
Yeah, a whole
There
ship
was
of,
a ship, like the rhyme of the ancient mariner.
I mean, there's a capital
So,
ship for an ocean
yeah.
trip. It's the Walloping. Do you know that song, by the way? This will be the
What
closing
is it?
thing. The Walloping Window Blind.
I don't think so.
Oh, that's
Send it me.
it's an old family one. I haven't found a good recording of it,
Oh, okay.
but yeah, it goes. I'll sing the refrain. So the first verse refrain.
Go for it.
A capital ship for an ocean trip was the Walloping Window Blind. No wind that blew dismayed her crew, nor troubled the captain's mind. The man at the wheel was made to feel contempt for the wildest blow. But when the gale had cleared, it often appeared he'd been in his bunk below. So blow, ye winds, hi ho, I'll rove and I will go. I'll stay no more on England's shore, so let the music play. I'm off on the morning train across the raging main. I'm off to my love with a boxing glove 10,000 miles away.
I love
And
it.
they go on all these different adventures, and it's just nonsense. But maybe it's about everything that we've been talking about.
It may be. Yeah, maybe. The snark may be a boojum after all.
Indeed.
A very good conversation again today, sir, and I hope all is well with you. I'm
Thank
going
you,
to end the
sir.
live stream first, so